Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking a look at a deeply misunderstood psychological mystery. Now, we're not here to judge anyone's decision to stay in a painful situation, far from it. Instead, we're going to dive right into the hidden architecture of the human mind to really understand the invisible tethers that keep people trapped. Because think about it, if a relationship causes you pain, why on earth do millions of people stay? It's a massive paradox, right? From the outside looking in, the solution seems so obvious, just walk out the door. But to actually solve this mystery, we've got to replace shame and judgment with genuine curiosity. These folks aren't weak. They are caught in a tremendously powerful psychological and biological trap. So let's start breaking down exactly how that trap is built.
Section 1, the toxic relationship paradox.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand why people can't just leave, we first need to establish exactly what kind of environment we're investigating here. A toxic relationship isn't just, having a bad day or a petty argument. We are talking about a systemic environment defined by emotional abuse, manipulation, control, gaslighting, and this deeply unsettling inconsistency. In this kind of chaotic ecosystem, your brain literally stops operating on logic and shifts entirely into pure survival mode.
Section 2, your brain on toxic love. So, this brings us to a really massive piece of the puzzle. What if the primary culprit keeping someone in a toxic situation is actually their own brain chemistry? Let's talk about dopamine and the brain's reward system. Now, most people think of dopamine as just the feel-good chemical, but it's actually much more accurate to think of it as the craving and motivation molecule. Dopamine drives our behavior. It pushes us to seek out rewards, and it forms the very basis of our deepest human attachments. In a normal, healthy relationship, dopamine is released steadily, but in a toxic relationship, that reward system gets completely hijacked. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference. Notice the stark contrast here. On one side, you have predictable affection. In a healthy dynamic, the brain feels safe, it feels calm. But on the other side, unpredictable affection. You get cruelty one day and then intense, passionate love the next. This creates immense emotional tension. So when that affection finally does arrive, it triggers a massive dopamine rush that is practically identical to pulling a slot machine lever. You keep playing not because you always win, but because you literally don't know when the next win is coming. Psychologists actually have a name for this casino-like dynamic: intermittent reinforcement. By delivering rewards, whether that's love, validation, or just a fleeting moment of peace, at completely irregular, unpredictable intervals, it maximizes addictive behavior. This is exactly why willpower just isn't enough. The brain becomes chemically addicted to those unpredictable highs just to soothe the terrifying lows. The person isn't just staying for the relationship anymore. Their brain is desperately chasing that next chemical hit of reconciliation. Section 3. The power of trauma bonding. Let's move to this next piece and see how this builds, because chemical addiction is really only half the story here. The pain itself becomes the glue. It builds what's known as a trauma bond. Notice this vicious, repeating loop. Step 1, tension builds up as the victim walks on eggshells. Step 2, the painful incident actually occurs. Step 3, the abuser apologizes and becomes intensely, overwhelmingly loving. And finally, step 4, a false calm settles in, right before the whole thing inevitably repeats. This inescapable loop forges an emotional attachment that is almost impossible to break from the inside. Why? Because the very person causing the terror is the exact same person who can soothe that terror. And this cycle explains one of the most tragic realities of toxic relationships, the paradox of defending the abuser. Friends and family are usually totally baffled when a victim fiercely protects the person who's hurting them. But when you understand the trauma bond, it actually makes complete sense. The victim's brain has been conditioned to see the abuser not just as a threat, but as their absolute savior from the very pain that the abuser inflicted in the first place. The intense emotional attachments forged in that reconciliation phase just override all logic. Section 4, the roots of the trap. So you might be wondering, why are some people more susceptible to this cycle than others? Well, to fully comprehend this trap, we have to investigate clues left in a person's developmental history, which brings us to anxious attachment. You see, our early childhood dynamics unknowingly dictate our adult romantic survival mechanisms. If a child grew up in an environment where love felt conditional, unpredictable, or they felt they constantly had to earn their caregiver's affection, they'll often develop an anxious attachment style. Fast forward to adulthood, and this translates into an intense, overwhelming fear of abandonment. When an anxiously attached person encounters a toxic partner who pulls away, their deepest childhood alarms go off, driving them to cling even harder to try and fix the relationship. So the crucial point is that it ultimately comes down to a devastating calculation: familiar pain versus terrifying uncertainty. For a lot of people trapped in these dynamics, the pain of the toxic relationship is absolutely awful, but it's familiar. They know how to survive it. Leaving means stepping out into the vast unknown and facing that primal fear of abandonment. It sounds crazy, but for the human brain, familiar suffering often feels a whole lot safer than the dark. Section 5, the fear of leaving. Because leaving is never just a single, simple action, right? It's a battle against multiple invisible walls of fear. It's not just one thing holding them back. It is the suffocating fear of loneliness, stacked right on top of financial dependence. Add in the social pressure, the absolute exhaustion of starting over, and a total loss of identity. I mean, when you've spent years managing a toxic person's emotions, you kind of forget who you are without them. These fears compound. They stack up like bricks to freeze a person entirely in place. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how a concept from the business world applies perfectly to human emotion here: the sunk cost fallacy. This is basically the reluctance to abandon a course of action because of a heavy prior investment. Think about it. Victims have invested years of their lives, their money, and massive amounts of emotional labor trying to fix their partner. Leaving means having to admit a total loss on that investment, which means all that past suffering was for absolutely nothing. And that is a brutally bitter pill to swallow.
Section 6, breaking free and rebuilding.
But here is the good news. As dark as this trap really is, the cycle can absolutely be broken. Recovery usually relies on 3 vital steps. First up, awareness. You can't defeat an enemy you can't see, right? Simply by watching this explainer and understanding the cycle, you are doing the very first step. You are robbing the toxicity of its invisible power. Second, psychological strategies. Things like setting super strict boundaries and seeking therapy to literally rewire those neural pathways. And finally, rebuilding. This is the slow, steady rediscovery of your own self-worth outside of all that chaos. Recovery is 100% possible, and it always starts with radical awareness. I want to leave you with this final thought to really let sink in. The hardest relationships to leave are often the ones that taught us to confuse pain with love. Walking away can feel like tearing yourself in half. But once you understand the psychological architecture of exactly why people stay, you can finally start building the door to walk out. So ask yourself, where in your own life, or maybe the lives of people you love, have you mistaken familiar suffering for safety? Thank you so much for exploring this mystery with me. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.